Hi there, it's Brian Sebastian, Movie Reviews and More, Worldwide TV Network, WomenOnTV.tv, iTube 247 out of Franklin, Tennessee, and iHeartRadio and all the platforms around the world. Let's talk about this, today's interesting day. All right, so Michael, who are you and where are you coming from?
My name is Michael Dineen. I am an author here in Long Island, New York. I'm actually in Long Island right now, Huntington to be exact.
So let's talk about why are you on here? This is interesting. You got an interesting topic, and the reason why it's interesting to me because I've been watching things on art, things on the mob, and things like that. So that's always been fascinating to me. What have you been working on, and what's completed right now?
Well, my book Suburban Gangsters it hit the presses in 2018, in January 16th, I believe, and it's a story mostly about Long Island and New York City, starting around 1985, and it goes all the way up actually through into the present. What it does is it follows the drug scene that got really, really big around 1985, and what happens is a bunch of regular kids from this area, just kids that grew up in the suburbs, become involved in major drug dealing and stuff. And they become very, very dangerous criminals.
It's interesting when we think back to 1985. I was in Connecticut in 85. I left in January 18th of 1987, and I moved to Los Angeles. Drugs are starting to hit in at that point. When I get to Los Angeles, you start having those gang wars starting to think. In New York, New Jersey, you start having the big, huge drug scene come in. Miami, cocaine is starting to flow and everything like that. It's an interesting time. So your book takes place about that point, isn't it? And then leading up to where we are now?
Yes, it does. Yep. The drugs played a pivotal role in a lot of that violence and all those gang problems and everything because everybody wanted a piece of the action. There was so much money being made illegally and everybody was just becoming corrupted. Everyone had their hands in the cookie jar. Everyone wanted some type of pay for what was going on back then.
What made you start wanting to write this? How did that come about? And where you see things where we are today? It's got to be interesting, isn't it?
It is. It's a little different today, but I see some similarities as to what happened in '85. I ended up wanting to write this. My life was a really crazy one. If you end up reading the book, you're going to see it's a lot of chaotic stuff that goes on over the years because I became, heavily involved in the cocaine sales and other drugs and stuff. And so did a lot of my friends. So we all kind of got tangled up in that over the years. And there was so much damage done to friends and everything. And the stories, it's mind boggling what happened back then. So back in the 90s, while some of the stuff was actually still going on, a friend of mine said, you should write a book about this stuff because nobody would believe half the stuff that was going on. And I always kept it in the back of my mind. And when I moved back from Brooklyn to Huntington in 2010, I waited a little while. I waited a few years and then I said, you know what? Now is the time to do this because I had finally got my life back together. And it was just time to try and put the pen to paper. So I figured I'd do it at that point.
Talk about how tough that was for you and some of the things that you went through, because not a lot of people survived that.
I was lucky. I mean, so lucky that I survived what I did because I saw this thing from every angle, what was going on, from the violence to the drug use to, it's just scary. I look back on my life now and I'm in shock that I was able to come out the other end basically okay.
Well, when you look back at that, did you ever in your mind think that I would love to use the real names, but where I am, I can't use real names. It's just a matter of what's going on.
I would love to put in the real names because some of the guys are actually really famous criminals at this point. And I just did it because some of them have kids and I wanted to just do it as a respect thing more than anything. I could have wrote about it because a lot of the stuff is public knowledge. It's from the newspapers and everything. It's a matter of public record. So I actually could have done it, but I said, you know what, to be on the safe side, I'm going to just change the names that way to avoid any types of controversy and stuff.
So talk about what the title of the book is, and then so where is your thoughts now on, since the book has been published? Where are you on things now, and what do you see happening now?
The book is titled Suburban Gangsters, and it covered a period from like 1985 to about 2010. And it right now, I would say, I'm trying to actually, I want to bring this to film. I'd like to bring this to a series because it would make for incredible drama. And the fact it's all true, the story's all true. Everything you read in there is true. And it's so powerful, the story. You could do so much with this. I look at a lot of the stuff that's out there on TV right now, and I'm saying to myself, like, they have a lot of stuff out there that's not that good, not that impressive and stuff. This would be a Sopranos type of deal. It's that good.
See, it sounds like it would be very, very good and timely, because I know what you're talking about. I've seen a lot of this stuff. I was just watching the art heist in the garden out of Boston that's never been solved. That's interesting. You automatically make me think of what you've written. Now, I haven't written your book, but I have a feeling I know a little bit of what was going on in it. So I can't wait to read it. And it's interesting because it would make a good series. It's that timely. I just know it is too.
Right now is the perfect time. It's funny that you mentioned that, because I was just reading up about that, because I was scouring the internet for some of the articles. There was a robbery crew that played a part in my book that we were kind of involved with at one point in time for a while. They were known as the Crash and Carry Gang. They would take like trucks and they would ram them through. They would go to like a fur store or a jewelry store or, you know, some high-end store, smash the truck through the window, and 4 or 5 of them would jump out and they would load up as much stuff as they can within about 5 minutes, and they would take off. And they did a lot of famous heists around New York City.
Talk about some of the strangest things that you've done, because the book has been out. However, there's always something that I can't really talk about, kind of what I did, even though it may or may not have been in the book. So it's almost like this is Michael's cut that didn't make the book that maybe I can talk about a little bit now. What might that be?
Oh my God. You know, that's almost too hard a question to ask right now, because every day, people don't understand. I try to tell them this. Every single day, there was something wild going on. And this went over a 25-year period. So to try and remember, like, the thing that stands out the most is almost difficult, because there was so much, you know?
Yeah. So here's the other thing that was interesting. You think back at The Sopranos, think of Tony Soprano, and I had always interviewed all of them, and it was an honor to see them from the beginning to the end. And it's one of those series when you know it was coming to the end. This is the last time you're going to see these guys all together, and that was
Right.
was fun. I remember James Gandolfini. You weren't supposed to ask him for pictures or anything like that, and I didn't necessarily do that. But I just remember the one time he directed something. It was like me, one of my co-hosts, and then 3 of his friends that he had done a thing on the military. And he would never hang around stuff, but he just hung around us. He just wanted to be there. And it was interesting. I'm like, I got to get a picture with him, but I know he's going to say no, because that's not what he wanted to do. It was about the film that he directed. Now, here we are. There's going to be a prequel of The Sopranos. Again, going back to your book, perfect time. But the thing about this is, I think of the Housewives, because the Housewives were heavily involved too. Did you have
Absolutely
that? And if you did, talk about that.
And it's weird, because in my story, all of our girlfriends at the times, we weren't married yet, played like these big roles, almost like what happened in The Sopranos. You know, there was so many, they were such a big part of the story that was going on. I didn't go into some of the things with my kid's mother, because I just didn't want my daughter seeing all that stuff in writing, you know?
Yeah.
But the women played a huge part in this whole thing. Very interesting.
Without mentioning any names, can you talk about 1 or 2 instances of the women? And the reason why I say that, because in The Sopranos, Tony never wanted to get into the drug business. A lot of them never wanted to do that, and eventually they ended up getting into it because they couldn't help it, because it was so lucrative.
I'm actually going to give you a little small spoiler from the book. At one point, I actually voluntarily started working with the police and feds as an informant because they had started knocking off. My partner got busted. Okay, so I knew my days were numbered at this point. So I joined forces with the police. But check this out. While I was working with the police as an informant, my girlfriend at the time goes to a pharmacy and robs it in broad daylight. And the cop that gets sent to investigate it is the cop that I was working with.
Now,
it's crazy stuff.
when did you find out about that? How long did that take?
I found out the next day because she had called me and she was really looped. And I said, uh-oh, this doesn't sound good. So I went over to her parents' house where she was, and she was in like a trance practically. So I had a bad feeling. So something made me look under the bed, and I found a giant duffel bag. It was about 3 feet long. I opened it up. It was filled with like 50 giant bottles from this pharmacy. And I was like, oh my God, I almost had a heart attack. I was like, I knew basically at that point what had happened. But then like 20 minutes later, I got a page from the cop that I was working with. And I get on the phone with him and he goes, did you find the drugs? And I was like, yeah. He goes, just do me a favor, get rid of them. And that was the extent of it. I mean, he could have went and busted her. You know, the fact that I was working with him, he didn't want to jeopardize the case at all.
Right. It's very, very interesting. You know, now people can understand what it took to be involved, to be an informant, but they don't always understand why and people end up doing that. It's a very tricky situation. You're thinking about your family. You're thinking what the worst case scenario. You're thinking like, do I want to spend the time in prison? Do I want to end up dead? I can only imagine what was going in your head when you do that. And then what happens when you're able to get away and then focus on writing a book? How does that happen?
You know, I had to separate myself from that whole scene for a while to be able to basically collect my thoughts. I mean, everything had been over for quite a while at that point. And that's when I was able to finally sit down and start really concentrating and figuring out how I wanted to do this. I needed to be away from it for a while because while you're caught up in that types of stuff, you don't have time to think about the writing so much because everything is just moving so fast in front of you.
Yeah. So how were you when you were locked down this past year? What was that like for you? And then were you thinking about writing something else?
I actually have some ideas right now that I'm thinking about, but I haven't actually put them in action yet because this has been an extremely tough year. I know everybody's had a lot of, hard things in the last year or so, but I lost my mom this year and my dad is struggling with dementia now. So I'm taking care of him right now. So that's been probably the toughest part of this whole thing.
So after you finished the book, what did you do after that? Was it relief for you that you had to get a chance to put everything down and then it's published? What was that feeling like for you?
It was a feeling of elation. I mean, I was proud of myself because I had not been in school in 30 years. I never graduated high school. And the last meaningful schooling I had was probably 10th grade. So for me, it was kind of difficult because of that, so when I was finally done, I could finally exhale and I felt like, wow, I finally accomplished something that was positive for the first time in so many years.
So did your kids ever get a chance to read the book?
My daughter did, and she absolutely loved it. She gave it to all her friends.
What was the strangest question she might have asked you that probably wasn't in the book, but she probably asked you?
Oh man. She asked me I'm not going to get into it, but she asked me some stuff about her mom. And I've always been candid with my daughter. I've told her everything from day one. And I ended up telling her some things that I didn't want to tell her, but I felt she needed to know it anyway,
Did that strengthen your bond as that that father-daughter relationship at that point too, you think?
Absolutely. Since I started writing, my daughter has been. She graduated from the University of Pennsylvania. She has
Wow.
been like my. She's been my rock. She has supported me and given me great encouragement, and she's a big part of the reason that I was able to actually do this and finish it.
Good for you. I can only imagine what that was like to do that. Not only therapeutic, but also, in a way, kind of releasing those demons, that things that just may have been trapped in your all of your body. Because you, I can only imagine what you went through. Only imagine. What was it like? When did your friends find out that you were a former, or did they never find out until you wrote a book?
The only a couple of people knew that I was informant. Me and the second partner that I had during the business time. Uh, what happened is I didn't get in any trouble. I actually took a calculated gamble, and one of the cops had said something to one of my friends, and he says, "Oh, if you need help with that, you better talk to Mike." So the cop says, "Okay, set it up." So then I'm saying to myself, you know what? I could get in good with these guys. And what happened is we got very chummy with them. We got very close to them, and they basically said to me, "Look, if you just want to sell weed, I don't care. If you start selling coke again, I'm going to end up busting you." But we didn't listen to them. I mean, we were doing everything right underneath their noses. We were basically running the game on them the whole time.
Do you have a copy of your book near you anywhere?
Actually, no, I just had to order a couple more copies because, and for some reason, recently, everybody's coming over here looking for them.
What's that feeling like for that, like that?
I like it. It's good. It's starting to get a name for itself, and for good reason. I mean, it's a very entertaining story.
So, would you write a follow up to that at all?
I don't know if I could write a follow up per se, but I actually am thinking about, because I was a first time writer, I left so much out of the story and certain things that should have been covered that I left out. What I may do is end up doing a revised edition of it and trying to add a lot more. Like, I didn't go into enough about how the families suffered when these people's lives were being destroyed by drugs and alcohol and stuff. And I really should have touched that because the families suffered tremendously during this time period.
And a lot of people don't really realize what that is like. I never got into the drug aspect of stuff. I've been that black male who's never been married, don't have any kids. I've been the abnormal one, if you can imagine that. And I was in radio. So what I did is I took care of all of those people who did that, and I saw what they were doing. So I never wanted to go that way. In other words, I tell everybody, I didn't want to be that black guy that had two, three kids, different moms, married and divorced twice, three times. I didn't want to be that guy. So I wanted to be the guy that took care of my friends who were partying out, and I would rescue them. So I was the designated driver. I would literally get out of bed and go pick them up and make sure that their names didn't end up in the paper the next couple of days. I was that person. So I can understand. And then, a lot of my friends who were Italian or Irish or whatever, I knew exactly what they were doing. But I'm like, how do you stay out of that lane? And how do you continue the friendship? It's not an easy thing to do. So I can only imagine how difficult that was for you.
Yeah, first off, amen. And that's great that you took that road and decided to be like that. You can never support people enough when people are struggling or going through problems and things like that, or involved in doing the wrong thing. I mean, you don't have to drop them as a friend or anything like that. You can be there for them and try and help them to find their way out of it and find the right path, which it sounds like you were doing. And you should be, that's something special. That's really excellent.
Well, I was a disc jockey. I was, if you, I don't know if you went to Studio 54, but I was thinking of those things like that. I was growing up in Connecticut. I was in East Lyme, Connecticut. There was only a town of 7,000. There was only three black families, and so everybody knew who we were. So
Interesting.
do I want to get in trouble? No. I know what it's like to be stopped by cops in Tennessee from just walking with headphones on. I know what it's like to be stopped by cops in Beverly Hills just walking too fast down the boulevard and they pull over. I never wanted to be that person and giving you a reason, even though I pretty much stayed out of trouble, but still sometimes you find yourself in it. And then so for you, I can't wait to read your book because yours is different. Out of all the things, people's books that I've read and the shows that I've seen, I have not seen anything of what you described. That's what makes yours a possible thing and something somebody will pick it up because it's unique.
Thank you. It's funny you mentioned that about the getting harassed while walking through Tennessee or whatever it may be. I moved into Brooklyn in 2002 into East New York, which is like, it's a really rough neighborhood, East New York and Bed-Stuy and everything. That's where I met my girlfriend and everything. But I had a run-in. I wasn't familiar with how things worked in that neighborhood. I had just moved there. And I was walking to Christine's house one day. I was going to meet her at her father's house to see if she was there. I'm walking down Fulton Street going to get on the J train. And when I saw one of my neighbors, all we did was shake hands. He's like, "Hey, Mike, yo, what's up?" And then I walked away. I started walking towards the subway stairs. And next thing you know, I turn around. I see this guy running. It's a white guy, about 50 years old. And I turned around. I'm like, who's he running after? And when I turned back around, the guy grabs me by my shirt. And next thing you know, I'm in a huge fight with like 5, 6 undercover cops, all because they wanted to shake me down and see if I had something on me because I shook my neighbor's hand. They automatically assumed because I was white and was in that neighborhood that I was, after drugs, getting drugs or whatever.
That's interesting. I can understand that. When I was in Tennessee, we have what do we have? 4,100,000 whatever views and still counting each day out of Tennessee alone. Those shows on our YouTube at all, which makes them very unique. We have 2 shows there that both of them have 1.1 million views a day and still counting. The reason
Nice.
I mention that is because the day before, my friend had a heart attack. His name is Jimmy Adams. He is the network is the site is called i2247.com. Well, it turns out, and I didn't know this till he started telling a story, he was Don King's bodyguard. So Don King would always have kind of whatever people around him, but he also was the bodyguard for a lot of the mobsters.
Right.
So he hasn't told his story yet, so he's going to tell it probably with us. But I was going to his house. He had just had a heart attack. So I walked 40 minutes. It's early in the morning. I'm used to walking. That's how I get exercise. I had my headphones on. I had a backpack. And then a cop went by me twice. And I know when a cop goes by you once, they circle around. And I'm like, oh, is he coming back around? He did. And then he pulls over to the side. It took me 3 minutes to get there. He goes, where are you walking to? I'm like, I'm walking to my friend's house. I guess I wasn't supposed to be in the area. They're all high upstate estates in Franklin, Tennessee.
Right.
I'm going to go live on the property, but they didn't know. He goes, "Do you want to ride?" I'm like, "No, I don't need to ride. I'm used to walking. I love walking. It's good for your exercise." And then he goes, "Do you have any ID on you?" I'm like, "Uh-oh, here we go." And the whole thing in my mind is I'm doing shows the next day. I'm like, this is interesting. He goes, "You sure you don't want to ride?" I'm like, "No." He goes, "Where you going?" I'm like, "Jimmy Adams' house." John King, the boxing promoter? Yeah, this is Jimmy Adams, his best friend bodyguard. And, I'm like, just going there. It's only 7 minutes down the street walking. It's nothing.
Right.
Sure you don't want to ride? And I'm like, and so what you just said, I'm like, why does this cop keep asking me if I want to ride? And then what cop asks a black guy if he wants to ride? And then third, was I going to get into the back seat or was I going to get into the front? So I don't know. Michael, I don't know the answer to that question. So I've asked all my white friends, would you have gotten in? They go, no. And the reason why I didn't get in, because first of all, it was 7 minutes down the street. Second of all, I didn't know this guy. And third, he's running my ID. He goes, your California license is expired. I'm like, well, yeah, because I'm getting a Las Vegas one and I can't have both. So I had to use the old one to fly to get here. So I had to explain everything. Again, I didn't do anything wrong. And then I'm like, the real reason I didn't get in, because I'm like, it doesn't make sense for a cop to ask a black guy to get in who's never been arrested. And I kept think about that. And I know these situations. But the next day, I went back to do our shows. The same cop was in the neighborhood. He was in the next door neighbors. And these had these long driveways in Tennessee. I hopped the fence
right.
for the code because my friend had just had a slight heart attack. So I didn't want him to get in his Humvee and come drive and get me. So I'm walking
right.
there. I'm looking at him to the left. The cop in the next door neighbor's looking at me to the right. And I'm like, yeah, I beat you because because the next day I took a lift over. I didn't want that same thing to happen because we were doing our shows. If I hadn't done that, we would have never have done our shows. We wouldn't have 4 million plus views a day and counting. Think about that. And I know you probably have been in situations like that because this is where your book came out of, right?
Absolutely. And I go into that in the book, the incident with the police. They ended up being, I had black eyes, I had bruises up and down they broke one of my ribs. It was awful. And I got that treatment. They didn't beat me up every time they saw me after that, but they didn't like seeing me after that. And every time they saw me, they jumped out of their cars with the guns drawn. I had to deal with this 2 or 3 times a week for like about 7 years while I was there. And every time they saw me, I got harassed and threatened by them.
Wow. Yeah. See, I knew you would understand that. It doesn't make any sense, does it?
It doesn't make any sense. And like they do that in there, like people, when they talk about it, actually, unless they live there, they have no idea how bad it is with that stuff in those inner city areas and stuff where it's, predominantly like a minority neighborhood or whatever. But they deem anybody who's over there is like all of a sudden like a lesser of a person or a lower class. That's the way they treat them.
Right. And it was interesting, the last time I got stopped, because again, I walk because it's good exercise. I walk because I'm inside doing things. So I'll never forget when I was walking down Rodeo Drive in Beverly Hills, I was walking to my office because my mailbox was here and one was here. And an undercover cop pulls over. He goes, "Why are you walking so fast?" I'm like, "I'm walking to my office." "Where's your office?" Just down the street." I go, "Why?" He goes, there's been carjackings here." I'm like, "Carjackings where?" "On Gregory Street." "Where's Gregory Street?" "Over here." So I'm like, "Well, why are you stopping me? I'm walking." It didn't make any sense. If you got carjackings and I'm walking, does that make sense? And I was confused. And then he gets in his car and drives away. And I'm sitting there, what just happened?
Brian, what's scary about that whole thing is anything could start or come from that initial stop where they're getting curious about somebody who's doing nothing wrong. It could look what it did when it happened with me. Basically, that's what happened because I was unaware of their policies of stop and frisk. It turned into I could have been killed over it.
Right. Exactly.
Same thing you could have too. Just the encounter with them can be dangerous no matter how trivial you may think it is, could turn deadly with them because you don't know what they're going to do.
Well, let me ask you this. If I had gotten into that cop's car, what do you think would have happened?
I actually wouldn't want to know, to be honest with you. I mean, anything could happen. If you got some rogue cop out there, you don't know what I saw so much stuff in Brooklyn. People don't believe or wouldn't understand how crazy the things are that they do in there and what they get away with. I don't trust police anymore after I lived in there for 7 years.
All right, so you're the first one who just made me realize that I did the right thing. Because the way you said it, because you understand walking through a certain neighborhood, just seeing a friend or whatever, I was just going to his house to help my friends, but to set up to do my shows, which was happening the next day. And now I know if I had gotten in there, whether it was either, because I wouldn't have gotten in the back, but even if I was gotten to the front, who's to say that I wouldn't have been accused of doing something that I didn't do? Because we know what that's like, don't we?
Absolutely. And people get accused with false allegations all the time. I've seen cops set people up that were doing nothing wrong. They grabbed me. They arrested me probably the 6 or 7 times when I was in there, most of the time for minding my own business.
Yeah. What's the message of the book that you still want to get out there regarding this, that people will pick this up and try to find it and actually buy it? What is that?
I want people to understand that there's a serious price that gets paid for the decisions that you make in life. It is so important that you be smart and make the right decisions, no matter how small they are, because the one smallest decision you may think is not a big deal could end up reshaping the entire course of your life.
Yeah, that is so true. And that's the reason why I said if my friends call me, I would get out of bed and go pick them up. I didn't want them to say, "Oh, they reached out to you. They're dead now." So I always thought about that. So that is so true. Do you think, and because I already know the answer in my head, do you think the police were worse then or still worse now, except everybody's got a phone and things can be captured?
I think they were way worse then. I just think now they're capturing it a little bit more. Just think because you didn't hear about it that often for the last 40, 50 years, don't think that things weren't going on, because just nobody had a phone to document any of this stuff. You understand? And
Yeah.
it's definitely still out there. You have to really, really be careful, because anything could happen with any one of them at this point. Who knows what their motives are at this point? You know, after everything that's happened and stuff, it's a very dangerous topic.
So, Michael, give you social media links. How can people reach out to you?
On Twitter, I'm at Michael Dineen 58. And that's basically the only one. I'm on Facebook also, but it's Michael Dineen. It's just my name.
Okay, and give the title of the book one more time.
The book is called Suburban Gangsters, and it's a compelling tale of life in the drug trade. It's a true story, and I think you'll find it quite entertaining. It's definitely worth the read.
I actually want to read this now, because when I hear Suburban Gangsters, I can only imagine what you wrote in that book. Because
you said you like the mob type stuff. Well, this is an independent criminal organization that kind of rose from the ashes of the cocaine explosion in 1985, and they started popping up like little brush fires all over the country, in every neighborhood, in every town, in every city.
I can imagine that. So inspirational. What's an inspirational quote you would leave for the audience? What would you say?
Oh man, live life to the fullest. Take care of yourself and make smart decisions that you don't have to regret later on.
That's a good one, and that's an important. So I always say when I end this, Michael, thank you so much for coming on. I'm going to actually go and follow you now too, because I want to read this book. If you see someone without a smile, please give them one of yours, because the world needs it. I'm Brian Sebastian, Movie Reviews and More, and we will see you next week.